Hello and welcome to a brand new video on my channel. Today I'm excited to bring you part 6 of the story Pandora and the Eternal War. I really hope you enjoy it. If you do, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with the latest parts of the series. And hey, if you think this story is as exciting as I do, feel free to share the channel with a friend who loves good stories as much as you do. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep bringing more content like this. So sit back, relax, and let's dive right into the next chapter. Enjoy the video. Pandora turned away from the window, her mind still buzzing from the thrill of her plasma energy demonstration. She walked toward the door and opened it, stepping through the dimly lit corridor. As she made her way into the large room that had been converted into a dining area, she couldn't help but notice remnants of machinery and tangled cables jutting out from the walls, as if something had forcefully ripped them apart. A rustic wooden oven sat on the rooftop terrace, its presence both charming and out of place. Leon was at the oven, pulling out a fresh loaf of bread. The warm aroma filled the air as he reached for a shelf made entirely of ice, where he retrieved some jam and butter with a grin. "This is my fridge," he said playfully. Pandora glanced at the ice shelf and thought to herself how useful it must be to have such an ice ability. She joined him at the table, savoring a slice of warm bread topped with jam. After finishing her breakfast, she stood up, contemplating her next move. Leon looked at her curiously. "Why are you getting up? Do you have something planned for today?" "I'm heading back into the Chaos Zone," Pandora replied, making her way to the balcony where Leon had baked the bread. She gazed out at the fog that enveloped the towering research facility at the foot of the giant pyramid. Leon's voice cut through her thoughts. "That's dangerous." Pandora reassured him. "Chaos energy doesn't harm me. You don't need to worry about me." He nodded, clearly unconvinced. "I suspected as much, but there are other dangers in the Chaos Zone. You can't underestimate monsters like the plasma-shooting iron wolves." A smile crept onto Pandora's face at the mention of those monsters. She had already encountered them before. With her ability to steal powers, she realized that she could absorb not only the powers of humans, but also those of the creatures that roamed the Chaos Zone, just as she had discovered the day before. This thought diminished her fear of monsters, at least those that weren't on an S-rank level, which definitely wouldn't be found in this area. "I'm not worried," she said, her tone light, though her mind remained deep in thought. Leon noticed her distraction. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about entering the Meta Cup," she admitted. "Are you planning to compete or just watch?" he asked. With a determined expression, she replied, "I want to compete." Leon's eyebrows shot up. "That could be too dangerous if it gets out that you're a vampire." Pandora understood the concern. "I know that very well," she said, lifting her hand. Turquoise plasma energy swirled around her fingertips. Without hesitation, she shot a blast into the fog to the right, declaring, "It's not a problem. My vampire form will never be discovered unless I'm forced to transform." Leon's surprise was palpable as he watched the plasma energy dance around her hand. "You have a superpower? And it's a C rank?" His eyes widened in astonishment, and he struggled to comprehend how this was possible. Pandora felt a twinge of guilt for keeping this hidden from him, but her instincts urged her to be cautious. "I'm not keeping it from you out of malice," she explained. "I just worry that if anyone found out." He nodded, realizing this was a sensitive topic she wasn't ready to discuss. "That's understandable," he said, respecting her boundaries. "But the Meta Cup won't be easy to get into," Leon cautioned. Pandora raised an eyebrow. "If it's that difficult to enter, do you really think I wouldn't qualify with a C-rank ability? What about a B rank or higher?" Leon almost choked on his own saliva at her unexpected ambition. He quickly regained his composure, shaking his head. "That's not something you can achieve in a few weeks." "Okay, so if I can't reach S rank or B rank, what if I showcase multiple abilities?" Pandora countered. "That's even crazier than just being powerful," Leon replied. "A C rank will be tough, especially with so many competitors. The problem isn't just having one ability, it's about effectively using it against numerous opponents. If you can't do that, you won't go far." Pandora nodded, taking in his words. So I need to train my abilities, Leon agreed. As she contemplated this, Pandora thought about how she didn't need to worry about him revealing her secret. She knew that, as a recluse and a former deserter, he lived far removed from the world. Even if he let something slip, no one would believe him without proof. She shook off these anxious thoughts, acknowledging that her tendency to overthink often led her to consider every possible scenario instead of simply enjoying the moment. She knew that her cautious nature stemmed from a need for self-preservation. Pandora and Leon spent the next few days training together in their makeshift training area, a large room in the building that had once served some unknown purpose, but was now filled with remnants of machinery and odd artifacts. Leon had devised a way to create ice shards from the humidity in the air, using his powers to condense water vapor into sharp, glittering points of ice. These shards served as targets for Pandora's plasma blasts. As she concentrated, she summoned glowing turquoise energy into her hands. Each time she fired a plasma ball at the ice, it vaporized instantly upon contact, filling the air with steam and creating a hissing sound that echoed through the room. The temperature difference was startling. While Leon could produce significant amounts of ice and extreme cold, Pandora's plasma was concentrated and far more intense. It melted right through solid blocks of ice, turning them into puddles almost instantaneously. "See, Pandora?" Leon explained, gesturing towards the melting ice. "The difference between our abilities means that you could potentially injure me, even with just a C-rank power. I can freeze entire cities, but I'm not immune to concentrated high temperatures." Pandora paused, her eyes wide with realization. "So, you're saying I could defeat someone much stronger than me?" "Yes," Leon replied, "but only if you strike at the right moment. If I were to focus all my energy on fighting you, I could easily encase this entire city in ice during our battle. You'd take damage much faster than I would, because I could move quickly across the ice. If you don't know where I am, you can't hit me with your plasma." He continued, "That's why it's crucial not to rely solely on your powers, but also to utilize technology and strategy." Pandora nodded, absorbing his words. "But there's no need to worry about someone dying in the metacup, right? There are special teams of heroes assigned to ensure no one gets seriously hurt." "Exactly," Leon assured her. "They're trained to rush in and provide medical assistance if anyone is injured during a duel. However, we should be cautious about your identity as a vampire." Pandora paused, thinking. "I can't transform while I'm asleep," she said thoughtfully. "I found that out last night. Even though I wanted to be inconspicuous in my dream, I woke up in my vampire form. The strong urge to revert to a human never kicked in." Leon raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" "I'm absolutely certain," Pandora replied. "While dreaming, I was fully aware of the need to remain hidden, and I didn't transform at all. So I think it's safe to assume I can't change without conscious effort." As the sun began to set, casting shadows across the training area, they wrapped up their session and headed back to their makeshift living quarters to rest. The next morning, Leon reminded her, "We should keep an eye on your transformation abilities. It might be useful to know how to control it during the metacup." They trained throughout the morning, focusing on Pandora's ability to shift from human to vampire and back. Each transformation required a few attempts, and sometimes she struggled to maintain control. Yet, with persistence, she eventually succeeded, each successful transformation reinforcing her confidence. As she stood in front of Leon, her human form flickering and then settling into her vampire visage, she felt a sense of power coursing through her. It was exhilarating, and despite the challenges ahead, she was determined to master her abilities. Pandora's cautious nature lingered at the back of her mind, urging her to think through every possible scenario, every risk. She often found herself overthinking, preferring to analyze situations too thoroughly rather than taking them at face value. In a world filled with unknowns and potential threats, her vigilance might just save her life. Pandora looked at Leon with a determined expression. "I'm ready to head into the chaos zone now," she said confidently. "I've proven I have control over my transformation." She approached the balcony and prepared to leap over the railing, intending to descend along the building's exterior wall. Just as Pandora was about to jump, Leon's voice stopped her. Pandora, wait!" We have an elevator. Pandora raised an eyebrow, skeptical. An elevator? In this chaos zone where no electronics or devices work? Leon chuckled softly. Well, you're right. Electronics don't work down in the fog. But up here, about 100 meters above it, technology still functions. Of course, the elevator itself doesn't work like you'd expect. Let's say I modified it in my own way. Pandora crossed her arms and tilted her head. Modified? Huh? So, can I use it? Leon hesitated for a moment, looking a little conflicted. He shifted his weight uncomfortably before speaking again. Pandora, I need to ask. Why are you collecting chaos crystals? I get that your existence is tied to chaos energy, and you have a chaotic superpower, but why take in more of it? Pandora paused, giving him only part of the truth. The chaos energy helps my ability grow, she said, her voice calm but hiding deeper emotions. Leon's eyes widened in surprise. Wait, you can absorb chaos? That shouldn't be possible. Pandora nodded slightly. Yes, I can absorb it, and by doing so, I strengthen my powers. But the moment those words left her mouth, Pandora felt a painful sting in her chest, a haunting memory surfacing. She recalled the time she had absorbed too much chaos energy in the E-rank chaos zone, where she lived with her parents. The consequences of that had been devastating. The guilt of indirectly causing her father's death, even if the heroes had been responsible, weighed heavily on her. The mere thought still hurt deeply. Leon noticed the shift in her demeanor and chose not to press further. He could tell she wasn't ready to reveal more. Okay, if you don't want to tell me more, I won't push you, he said softly. But Pandora, I think it's time you think about your goals. I know you're still grieving the loss of your parents. I lost my best friend. Your father and I fought side by side in the war for many years, and we went to the academy together. His death hurt me too, more than you can imagine. But what is it that you want? Do you seek revenge? Pandora's carefully constructed emotional mask began to crack under the weight of his question. She barely held it together as she replied, her voice steady but filled with underlying pain. Yes, I want revenge. To Pandora's surprise, Leon simply nodded and said, Revenge isn't the answer. It never is. But I won't stop you, and I won't help you either. You always have a place here with me if you need it. But as for your personal quest, I won't interfere. Pandora swallowed hard and nodded in acknowledgement. After a brief silence, Leon agreed to take her down, albeit in his own unique way. He led her to the elevator shaft outside his apartment. With a snap of his fingers, he conjured an ice platform within the shaft. He stepped onto it, gesturing for Pandora to follow. The surface of the ice was rough, with tiny ice shards protruding from it to provide traction, preventing them from slipping. As they began to descend, Pandora watched in awe at how effortlessly Leon manipulated the ice. How are you doing this? She asked, her curiosity getting the best of her. Leon smiled. I'm constantly regenerating the ice beneath us before it melts from the pressure we put on it. And as for the walls, he said, nodding toward the shaft, I make sure the ice scrapes against them with just enough force to control our speed. By creating enough friction, I can slow us down so we descend smoothly. Once they reached the bottom, Pandora stepped off the ice platform, and with another snap of Leon's fingers, the ice disintegrated into snow. Pandora moved toward the entrance, but the moment she stepped outside, a wave of chaos energy surged into the room, carried by the thick gray fog that blanketed the chaos zone. Purple lightning crackled within the fog, and Leon instinctively took a step back. Pandora, however, moved forward, unfazed. The fog seemed to gravitate toward her, swirling around her body as if drawn by some unseen force. Her skin began to glow with a faint purple hue, even in her human form, as if she were absorbing the very essence of the chaos. Without hesitation, she reached for a nearby chaos crystal, growing just 10 meters away from the building. Her fingers closed around it, and to Leon's astonishment, the crystal did not detonate as it normally would. Instead, it dissolved into dust, absorbed by Pandora's hand. Leon watched in silent awe as Pandora stood there, the glowing remnants of the chaos crystal fading into her. She turned back toward him, her face calm, but with an intensity in her eyes that Leon hadn't seen before. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of her actions and abilities settling between them. Finally, Leon broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. You really can absorb chaos. Just be careful, Pandora. That kind of power comes with consequences. Pandora's eyes darkened as she turned to Leon, her voice firm but steady. "I know very well what the consequences of my ability are," she said, her words carrying a weight Leon hadn't heard before. "The most powerful in this world are often feared, and those who are just beginning to gain power, they are often manipulated or controlled. The rich and the mighty always seek to control those on the rise. That's how it works. The wealthy don't want to lose their position, and they'll do anything to strengthen it." She paused, her gaze hardening. "But you don't have to worry about me, Leon. I'm not someone who will bow to anyone. Not anymore. Not since then." Her voice trailed off, and for the first time, Leon saw a flicker of something deeper in her. An emotional intensity, a darkness that seemed to swallow the light in her eyes. It unsettled him, though he didn't say anything. Pandora turned her back to him, stepping into the swirling fog. Her voice echoed distantly as she called back, "I'll be back by evening." Leon watched her disappear into the mist, his concern growing. He hesitated before turning around and pressing a button, the elevator doors closing behind him with a soft hiss. He sighed and made his way back to his apartment, unsure of what to make of the conversation they just had. Meanwhile, Pandora moved through the dense fog, her senses heightened. Even in her vampire form, the thick mist obscured her vision. She could make out vague shapes, skeletal remains scattered across the ground, remnants of buildings reduced to rubble, and the occasional deep crater scarring the land. Destruction was everywhere, but amidst it all, Pandora felt strangely at ease. The chaos energy surrounding her was familiar, comforting even. She was searching for a monster, a threat, anything, but found none. Yet the feeling of being watched gnawed at her, growing stronger with each step. A sudden sharp pain tore through her back, her leather jacket shredded by an unseen claw. Blood trickled down her spine, the sting sharp, though her vampiric regeneration was already working to close the wound. Pandora spun around, her eyes scanning the fog for her attacker, but she saw nothing. The haze was too thick, and if something had been there, it was gone now. Another strike came, this time raking across her arm. Blood dripped from the fresh cut, and while the pain reached her, it was dulled by her regeneration. But her clothes couldn't keep up. Her jacket was rapidly falling apart. The attacks came faster, and Pandora struggled to dodge them. She couldn't fight something she couldn't see. A powerful blow sent her crashing into a wall, her body slamming into the stone with force that would have broken the back of anyone less resilient. But she endured, though she knew she wouldn't last much longer at this rate. Instinctively, Pandora shifted fully into her vampire form, the transformation quick and efficient. Her bones realigned, her senses sharpened, and the familiar rush of strength surged through her body. The pain was intense, but it didn't cloud her mind. Her eyes, though sharp, were useless here. She closed them, relying on other senses instead. Her heightened sense of smell picked up the scent of fur, sweat, and blood. An animal, no doubt. She could hear its heartbeat, slow and steady, and the sound of its breathing, calm despite the chaos. It was close. Pandora's lips curled into a smirk. The creature didn't know she could sense it. The air was thick with the scent of the beast, a panther-like creature from the sound and smell. Its invisibility made it a dangerous foe, but now, Pandora had the advantage. Her heart quickened with excitement as she pretended to search aimlessly, of her eyes still closed. She could feel the creature watching her, waiting for its next attack. When it lunged again, Pandora reacted with precision. She leapt into the air, flipping over the beast in a tight arc. In a single motion, she landed squarely on its back, her hands gripping its fur tightly. The creature roared in surprise, its form flickering as she began to drain its ability. The panther's growl echoed through the fog, but it couldn't throw her off. Its invisibility shimmered and faltered until it became fully visible, a sleek, muscular creature with gray, striped fur. Pandora's grip tightened as she absorbed its power, her body tingling with the rush of new energy. With a final snarl, the panther lashed out at her, desperate to shake her loose. Pandora, now satisfied, jumped off, deciding to let the creature go. But it wasn't finished. Despite its newfound visibility, it still attacked, and Pandora responded with a quick burst of plasma energy. The fight was over in an instant. Pandora stood over the defeated creature, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She could feel it, just as she had with her plasma ability. the knowledge of how to use this new power coursing through her veins. With a simple thought, she vanished, becoming invisible, then reappeared moments later. But there was a catch. Her body became invisible, as did her blood, but her clothes remained visible. She glanced down at her now tattered jacket and torn shirt, frowning slightly. "Looks like I'll need to be careful with this one," she muttered to herself, as she vanished once more, testing the limits of her newfound ability. The thought of having to strip completely to make full use of her new invisibility power wasn't particularly appealing to Pandora. She grimaced at the idea, shaking her head slightly. It wasn't just the inconvenience, but something about the vulnerability of it made her uncomfortable. As she glanced around the misty landscape, she wondered if there were more creatures like the panther hiding in the fog. Closing her eyes, Pandora focused on her other senses. She couldn't always rely on sight, not here. Her heightened senses scanned the area, and soon enough, she picked up on another presence nearby. Quietly, she moved toward it, only to find a small creature, another panther, but much smaller. A cub. Pandora realized that the panther she had just defeated must have been protecting her young. Strangely, she felt no guilt as she knelt down to pick up the cub. The little thing was shocked at first, its small body stiff in her arms, but as Pandora looked at it, an idea formed in her mind. She had seen Lola adopt strange creatures before. Could she do the same with this cub? It would be interesting to see if the creature could be trained, and she wouldn't mind having a companion with the ability to turn invisible. She cradled the cub against her chest, stroking its fur as she thought. "Maybe I'll take your ability someday too," she muttered half seriously. The cub stayed tense for a few moments, but then it relaxed slightly, letting her carry it. Pandora began making her way back to Leon's home, the small panther cub still in her arms. However, halfway through her return, she sensed danger again. A massive, silent spider came into view, its many legs moving quickly but soundlessly across the ground. Something about it was off. As it lunged toward her, Pandora realized that the spider wasn't real. It was an illusion. Her real enemy was behind her. Pandora spun around just in time, still clutching the cub in one arm. With her free hand, she leaped onto the real spider's back, focusing her energy into a concentrated plasma strike. The searing beam pierced through the spider's neck, decapitating it swiftly. The monster fell limp beneath her, and with its death, Pandora absorbed its ability to create illusions. She was about to continue when she felt a wave of dizziness hit her. Her vision blurred, and nausea clawed at her stomach. Pandora cursed under her breath, realizing that one of the creatures she'd fought must have been venomous. Perhaps it had been the panther mother's claws, or maybe the spider had carried the poison. Regardless, she was in trouble. Even with her vampiric regeneration, the poison was taking a toll. Pandora staggered, still gripping the cub as she made her way back to Leon. The poison was more potent than anything her body had fought before. By the time she reached Leon's home, she could barely stand. Leon immediately saw the change in her. He rushed to her side, laying her down gently on the sofa, concern creasing his face. "Pandora, you need to switch back to your human form," he urged, desperation in his voice. "Maybe the poison won't affect you as much." Pandora shook her head weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I switch, I'll die for sure. A human wouldn't survive this. I have to push through it, as a vampire." Her eyes fluttered shut as she succumbed to the pain, her body racked with exhaustion. As Pandora lay there, fighting the effects of the poison, Lola padded into the room. The small panther cub wriggled nervously in Pandora's arms, attempting to turn invisible to escape. Lola, sensing the young creature's distress, approached it gently. With surprising tenderness, she lifted the cub by the scruff of its neck, much like a mother dog would carry her pup, and placed it on the ground. Her presence seemed to calm the cub, and it stopped struggling, settling down beside her. Pandora, her mind slipping in and out of consciousness, saw this through the haze of her pain. Even in her weakened state, she marveled at Lola's gentle nature. Despite being a fierce protector, Lola had a nurturing side, one Pandora hadn't fully appreciated until now. As she drifted into restless dreams, she found comfort in knowing that Lola was there, watching over her. Time passed slowly as Pandora battled the poison. She tossed and turned in feverish dreams, her mind lost in a swirl of chaotic visions. Leon did what little he could, placing a cool cloth on her forehead and hoping her vampiric regeneration would eventually purge the poison from her system. But it was a slow process, slower than any of them had anticipated. By the next morning, Pandora was still weak. Leon stayed by her side, his worry evident. Days passed, and while she showed signs of improvement, the progress was painfully slow. A week later, Pandora finally began to feel her strength returning. The poison had been defeated, but it had taken a heavy toll on her. As she lay on the sofa, she noticed a strange sensation in her mouth. Blood was dripping from her fangs. Pandora's gaze followed the trail of blood and settled on Lola, who was resting her paw gently on Pandora's stomach. A small bite mark marred Lola's leg, evidence that Pandora had bitten her in her delirium. Lola, her intelligent eyes gleaming, looked up at Pandora as if to say, "It's no big deal." Her calm demeanor made it clear that she understood what had happened, and that she didn't blame Pandora for it. Pandora's chest tightened with guilt. She had bitten Lola, but somehow that act had saved her life. Pandora leaned back into the pillows, trying to collect her thoughts after everything that had happened. The weight of the new ability she had just fused still pulsed within her, and the remnants of the poison left her body feeling weak, though it was fading. She looked at Leon, who sat at the edge of the bed, his eyes searching her face. After a moment of silence, Leon cleared his throat and spoke. "Pandora, there's something else I need to tell you," he began, his tone serious but not overly tense. "The preparations for the next Metacup are almost complete." Pandora blinked in surprise. The Metacup. She had almost forgotten about it in the chaos of the past few days, the strange encounters, the poison, the merging of abilities. But the Metacup was huge. It wasn't a life or death event, but rather one of the biggest competitions for metas, like the Olympics of their world. A chance for metas to showcase their abilities and for new talents to be recognized. Winning wasn't just about glory, it meant gaining respect, opening doors to opportunities, and for some, a path to greater influence. Leon continued, "We've only got a few days before it begins. If we want to make it in time, we need to leave soon." Pandora processed his words, the significance of the event settling in. "How soon?" she asked, her voice low, but her gaze sharp and focused now. Leon sighed. "We should leave by tomorrow at the latest. The organizers are almost done, and once the final date is confirmed, we won't have time to waste." He paused, looking at her with concern. "I know you're still recovering, but we need to be there on time if you're going to compete. Are you sure you're ready?" Pandora's mind was already racing. Competing in the Metacup was something she had been preparing for since she first started collecting abilities. Each one brought her closer to being strong enough to stand out, and now she was on the brink of entering one of the most prestigious events in the meta community. It wasn't about survival, it was about proving her worth, showcasing her skills, and maybe even gaining a few new allies. Her thoughts drifted to Lola, who had just left the room after accepting her apology. To Leon, who had been by her side through it all, to the new abilities she had gained. It was all building up to this moment, and Pandora felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let anything hold her back. Not the poison, not the doubts, not even her own exhaustion. "I'll be ready," she said firmly, sitting up straighter, though she still felt some lingering dizziness. "We leave tomorrow." Leon studied her for a moment, his expression a mix of admiration and worry. "All right," he said finally, standing up. "I'll get everything packed and make the final arrangements. But don't push yourself too hard, Pandora. You've already come so far." Pandora gave him a small, confident smile. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." As Leon left the room to make the necessary preparations, Pandora let out a deep breath. As the evening set in, Pandora felt her strength returning. The fatigue from the battles against the Nebel Panther and Illusion Spider had mostly faded, and by dinner time, she could stand and walk with ease. She joined Leon for a simple meal, enjoying the quiet company and the warmth of food after such a taxing experience. Afterward, tired but recovering, she laid down and fell into a deep, restful sleep. The next morning, Pandora awoke feeling stronger than ever, vital, almost invincible. The effects of the panther's poison had fully disappeared, and she felt her powers humming within her, ready to be unleashed. She stretched, feeling the energy coursing through her, and noticed Leon was already preparing for their journey. He had packed everything they needed for travel, neatly organized and ready to go. "Morning," Pandora greeted him, her voice steady and full of confidence. Leon glanced up from his preparations and nodded with a small smile. It was time to leave. They set out soon after, riding on the back of Lola, the oversized wolf-like creature that had become their steadfast companion. Pandora sat behind Leon, holding onto his waist as Lola leaped from rooftop to rooftop. The wind whipped through Pandora's hair, cool and brisk as they moved across the city. Despite the rush of wind and movement, a deep silence settled between Pandora and Leon. Pandora's thoughts wandered as they sped forward. She wondered why Leon was so willing to help her get into the Metacup. She knew he didn't want to involve himself in her quest for revenge. His nature was too peaceful for that. Yet, here he was, supporting her. Was it just to get her out into the world? To see that not all people were the same as those she sought vengeance against? She couldn't help but question his true motives, but she kept her thoughts to herself, unwilling to break the stillness with uncertainty. Leon, on the other hand, worried in silence. He believed it was better for Pandora to be around more people, to experience a world outside of her thirst for vengeance. He hoped that through the Metacup, she might see that not everyone was like those who had wronged her. But a small part of him questioned if he was doing the right thing by encouraging her to enter. Would it help her, or would it only push her further down the path of destruction? By the afternoon, they passed an old cemetery at the edge of a seemingly abandoned village. The village felt eerily quiet. No one walked the streets. The only signs of life were the flickering lights in the windows, as if the inhabitants were glued to something inside their homes. Pandora's senses tingled as they neared the cemetery. Something about the place called to her. She turned to Leon. "I think we should take a break here," she said casually. Leon furrowed his brow, but after a brief pause, he nodded. "We're on schedule. A quick stop won't hurt." Pandora smiled at his agreement and slid off Lola's back. "I just need to use the restroom," she said, gesturing towards a small, decrepit structure at the edge of the cemetery. Leon didn't question it, though something about her demeanor seemed off. He stayed back, watching her from a distance. Pandora disappeared into the cemetery, weaving between the headstones. After a brief moment, she emerged from the old restroom and bent down to touch a gravestone. As her fingers grazed the cold stone, a faint purple glow pulsed from her fingertips. She moved from grave to grave, repeating the gesture at 58 different graves, each scattered seemingly at random across the cemetery. From where Leon stood, the light was barely noticeable. He watched her, confused but not alarmed. When Pandora finally returned, he asked casually, "What were you doing back there?" Pandora smiled, feigning innocence. "Oh, I just thought the flowers were pretty, and I wanted to read the names on the stones." It was an obvious lie, but Leon didn't press her for more. He wasn't even sure he had seen the light at all. Maybe his mind had played tricks on him. They resumed their journey, leaving the quiet village and its cemetery behind. As they rode on, Pandora broke the silence. Why were there so few people in that village? It seemed deserted. Leon turned slightly, still focused on the path ahead. "They were probably watching the preliminary rounds of the Metacup," he explained. "It's a big event, and the entire country is following it closely. There are several attractions leading up to the main tournament. Exhibitions, competitions, and shows to keep the audience entertained." Pandora absorbed the information, realizing just how large and important the Metacup must be. It was not just a single tournament, but a massive spectacle that held the attention of entire towns. The idea that she would be competing in something so vast sent a thrill through her. She was eager to test her abilities against other contenders, but a small voice inside her reminded her of the dangers. Would she be able to keep her vampire nature hidden? Could she control her powers well enough to ensure she didn't accidentally reveal her secret? She pushed the thoughts aside, knowing she'd have to confront them soon enough. As Pandora and Leon arrive in Metropolis Alpha, Pandora is struck by the grandeur and overwhelming scale of the city. Alpha, the largest and safest metropolis in human civilization, gleams like a beacon of modernity and power. Its towering skyscrapers pierce the clouds, and the streets below hum with the synchronized flow of technology and people. Despite the beauty, Pandora feels a pang of unease as her thoughts drift to the destruction that once marred this city. The aftermath of the battle between her father, Elias, and the Hero Association. That battle, which shook even the safest city in the world, left scars that ran deeper than the physical damage. The crumbled buildings had long been rebuilt, and the traces of devastation were all but erased. But Pandora still remembers what Leon had told her, how the memory of that destruction had lingered in the minds of the people. The fight was legendary, and yet it was a bitter reminder of how the Hero Association had killed her father, marking him as a villain. Now, nothing of that battle remains for her to see, only the towering cityscape hiding the painful history. Pandora pulls herself out of her thoughts, focusing on the present. Today, her purpose is different. She's here for the Meta Cup. And as they make their way through the bustling streets, the anticipation builds. The Meta Cup is not just any tournament, it's a proving ground for the strongest, and Pandora knows the competition will be fierce. Still, she feels a mix of excitement and anxiety as they approach the entrance to the Meta Center, the massive facility where the tournament will take place. The line to enter the Meta Center is long, crawling forward at a slow pace. Pandora can't help but notice the tight security. There are guards everywhere, dressed in high-tech armor, scanning each participant with sophisticated equipment. Cameras are mounted at every corner, monitoring every movement. Pandora feels a shiver of nervousness. She knows she doesn't have any public records, no official identification. Not even a photo of her exists in any database. Her family had lived off the grid, relying only on her father's superpowers and her mother's magic. Pandora watches the cameras as they scan each entrant, her heart pounding. She hopes they won't flag her, that nothing will go wrong. If the system detected something off about her identity, what would happen? Would they suspect she wasn't who she claimed to be? Would they learn what she truly is? She shakes off the thoughts as best she can, focusing on staying calm. Her thoughts are interrupted when a guard in an exoskeleton, a bulky, futuristic suit designed to withstand serious damage, signals her to step aside. Pandora's stomach drops as the guard gestures for her to undergo a secondary check. Her plasma ability will need to be registered. She hesitates for a second before summoning her plasma, the warmth of it rushing through her fingers. A handheld scanner is brought out, and the man operating it gives her a brief, professional nod before passing the scanner over her hand. The scan is over in an instant, but Pandora's nerves remain frayed. She can barely breathe, waiting for the result. What if the scanner somehow detected her other powers? The illusion, the invisibility, the stolen abilities she now carried. There was no way it could sense all of that, right? The scanner gives a quick, soft beep, and the man nods once more. All clear, he says, barely glancing at her as he marks her ability as C-rank plasma. The guard in the exoskeleton seems a little surprised that someone so young would already be ranked in the C tier, but otherwise, it all seems routine. Pandora lets out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She's surprised by how quickly it's over. The scan had only detected her plasma ability, completely ignoring her other powers, just as she had hoped. It seems like the sophisticated machinery can only scan the active power being used at the moment. Her fears of being exposed as someone with multiple abilities, a rare phenomenon almost unheard of, dissolve. Leon had told her how unusual it was. Out of every 1,000 people with superpowers, maybe one would have 2 abilities. Of those, an even smaller fraction would have 3. The odds that someone could wield as many as Pandora, 60 abilities in total, including the ones she stole, was beyond comprehension. Pandora steps back in line, relieved. For now, her secret is safe. As they continue into the Meta Center, Pandora's mind buzzes with questions. How could the scanner only detect 1 ability? Shouldn't it have picked up at least 1 of the 58 abilities she stole from the graves? But she pushes the thoughts aside, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She's glad things went smoothly. Once inside, the atmosphere is electric. The Meta Cup is drawing competitors and spectators from all over the world, and the arena is a bustling hive of activity. There are participants everywhere, each one carrying themselves with a confidence that speaks to their skills. Pandora stood on a small, square platform, the gray stone beneath her feet cold and unyielding. The space was fenced off by simple metal rails, marking the area for the contestants. Around her, other participants stood in groups, dressed in casual clothes, chatting lightly, their energy and confidence apparent. Despite the calm atmosphere, the sheer size of the stadium around them was overwhelming. Thousands upon thousands of spectators filled the massive stands, their voices a distant hum of excitement. The grand MetaCup Stadium was buzzing with anticipation, and Pandora could feel the intensity of the crowd's energy pulsing through the air. She glanced upwards, towards the towering figures who were overseeing the event, heroes clad in intricate, advanced exoskeleton armor. Each hero's suit was unique, with varying color schemes and designs, but all had the same sleek, futuristic aesthetic. Some were dark and menacing, while others had vibrant tones of blues, reds, and metallic silvers. Pandora noticed one hero with a flowing cape, and she frowned slightly. A cape? Really? She thought, finding it utterly impractical for a battle. It could easily be caught or used against the wearer. But still, she knew appearances mattered here. Image was everything, and the cape added a touch of grandeur that the crowd likely adored. The arena itself was vast. In the center, a series of gray stone platforms were arranged, possibly for later parts of the competition. Pandora kept her eyes on them, her mind half focused on what challenges might lie ahead. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and a large holographic projection flickered to life above the stadium, casting a purple hue over the competitors. The projection depicted a woman with striking purple hair and bright blue eyes, wearing a sleek black suit. Her excitement was palpable as she began to address the crowd. "Welcome, everyone, to this year's MetaCup," the announcer's voice echoed throughout the massive stadium, full of enthusiasm. "I am your host, Selena, and I cannot wait for the incredible displays of power, strategy, and resilience that we will witness today." Pandora's heart raced as the crowd roared in approval, the sound like a wave washing over her. She tried to steady her breathing, but the enormity of the event was starting to weigh on her. She glanced again at the competitors around her. Each of them seemed so calm, so collected. But she knew better than to underestimate them. Selena continued, her holographic figure pacing energetically in the air. "For the first round of the MetaCup, we are starting with a true test of endurance and skill, a race through the northern mountains. The goal is simple: make it to the marked red line at the end of the mountain range, and you qualify for the next round. But be warned, this is no ordinary race. The terrain is harsh, the obstacles will be dangerous, and time is of the essence." Pandora's eyes widened slightly. A race through the mountains? She hadn't expected that. Her mind raced as she tried to recall any details about the mountains north of the metropolis. They were notorious for their steep cliffs, jagged rocks, and unpredictable weather. "As always," Selena continued, "the entire race will be monitored closely via satellite images and drones, so any attempts at cheating will be immediately detected. We will also remind you that while accidents and injuries may happen, intentional harm will result in immediate disqualification and possible legal action. Play fair, and may the best contestant win." Pandora glanced at the competitors around her once more. Some looked unfazed by the announcement, while others, like herself, seemed to tense up. She knew her abilities would give her an advantage in navigating the tough terrain, especially her newfound powers of illusion and invisibility. But the thought of being watched so closely made her feel uneasy. Any slip-up could reveal too much about what she was capable of. Her eyes shifted back to the hologram as Selena wrapped up her announcement, the excitement in her voice never wavering. "Get ready, competitors. The first round will begin shortly. Make your way to the starting platforms and prepare for the race of your lives." Pandora took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She felt Leon's presence at the edge of the arena, watching her silently, as he always did. The stakes were high, but she couldn't afford to falter now. The MetaCup was her path to greater recognition, and ultimately, the first step towards her true goal of revenge. She made her way to the starting platform, her mind racing through possible strategies. Her plasma ability would be useful for defense, but it wouldn't give her much of an edge in a race like this. But her new illusions, those could help her confuse others, perhaps even create distractions to throw her competitors off course. She wasn't here to make friends, after all. As she stood in place, waiting for the signal to start, Pandora cast one final glance at the towering heroes who oversaw the event. Despite the calm exterior they displayed, she knew this was all a game to them, a spectacle to prove their own strength and superiority over everyone else. She had no intention of losing here. With a small smirk, she whispered to herself, "Let's see how this plays out." Pandora stepped carefully over the gray stone plates, each one cold and smooth beneath her feet. She moved toward the starting line, a vibrant line of red light projected onto the ground by a hovering drone. As she approached, the voice of the commentator echoed through the arena. "The countdown begins now." A translucent, red-tinted barrier appeared before her and the other competitors, its glowing numbers ticking down from 30. Pandora narrowed her eyes at the hologram, sensing with her illusions that it was nothing more than light, devoid of any real mass or substance. The projection shimmered, but its ethereal nature didn't interest her much. She was focused on something far more pressing, her own physical limitations in this human form. She knew she couldn't rely on her vampiric abilities here, not if she wanted to keep her true potential hidden. But that didn't mean she was helpless. Inside her, a collection of powers churned, ready to be mixed. She had grown adept at this, at weaving together abilities like paints on a palette, blending them to create something new. First, she called upon the double jump ability, a weak F-rank power that allowed her to leap twice in the air, even without solid ground beneath her. Then, she added the kangaroo jump and rabbit leap, both E-rank abilities with animalistic origins that granted explosive jumping power. Normally, these would manifest in odd ways, with the user developing animal traits, but Pandora's unique condition spared her the usual drawbacks. She pondered briefly on why she didn't grow animal ears or fur like the original wielders of these powers, but there wasn't time to linger on such thoughts. Next, she threw in increased agility, an F-rank skill that amplified her overall movement speed by 1.5 times, and speed boost, which doubled her running speed. Combining these already pushed the limits of what she could handle in this form, but Pandora was skilled in this particular craft. As the powers coalesced, she felt them molding into something new, something stronger, a cohesive ability greater than the sum of its parts. However, the result was still mid-tier, an E-rank ability. Not enough. With a calm focus, Pandora reached into the well of power she had acquired and sacrificed 10 F-rank abilities, shattering their energy cores and folding them into the new creation. The ability swelled, its presence growing until it was as large as her fist, an indication of its new strength. She smirked slightly. This was no ordinary skill now. She named it simply reinforcement. It wasn't the most creative name, but Pandora wasn't concerned with labels, only results. Now, she was at least as fast and agile as she would be in her vampiric form. The countdown continued, and Pandora considered her options. She couldn't afford to reveal too much. If anyone saw her using more than 2 abilities, it would raise suspicions. But she had an idea. If questioned, she could always feign ignorance, claim she hadn't realized she possessed a second ability until now. After all, who could definitively prove otherwise? 3, 2, 1. The moment the countdown hit 0, the translucent red barrier vanished, and the gate leading out of the stadium swung open. Beyond it lay a stretch of city streets, lined with obstacles designed to slow them down. Beyond the city, the distant silhouette of the mountain range loomed, with a glowing red marker signifying the finish line. The racecourse was long. Pandora could barely see the path in its entirety, but she knew it would take them through forests, uneven terrain, and who knows what else. As soon as the gate opened, the competitors surged forward. Chaos erupted instantly. The first group to shoot ahead were the flyers, contestants who could hover or soar through the air. They ignored the obstacles, gliding effortlessly above the streets. But Pandora's eyes flicked to the ground, where small hatches opened, revealing automated turrets. They immediately fired stun bolts and nets at the flyers, bringing down several of them with pinpoint accuracy. Pandora grinned. The race organizers had planned for this. No shortcuts. She focused inwardly, activating her newly formed reinforcement ability. With a light push from her feet, she launched into the air. Unlike the others, she didn't need solid ground to move. Each time she leaped, a flicker of energy formed beneath her feet, just long enough for her to push off again. It was like bouncing off invisible platforms, and with each motion, she gained speed and momentum. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but Pandora preferred it that way. While the others battled it out in plain sight, she remained close to the ground, using her mixed abilities to propel herself forward in calculated bursts. With each leap, her muscles absorbed the shock of impact, storing that energy for the next push forward. As she darted through the crowd, avoiding obstacles with ease, Pandora felt a surge of satisfaction. Her gamble had paid off. This new ability, while created from weaker powers, was perfectly suited for this challenge. The race had barely begun, and already the field was spreading out. Different groups of competitors were forming, the fastest at the front, those with more versatile abilities taking the lead. But Pandora wasn't concerned with any of them. She was focused on the goal, the red marker in the distance, and what awaited her after this round. Whatever happened, she couldn't afford to lose. Not here. Not now. Pandora heard a rushing sound as something whizzed past her, barely noticeable in the chaos of the race. Distracted by the noise of the crowd and the overwhelming rush of the participants around her, she caught sight of something white darting through the air. It attached itself to the back of one of the runners, who was suddenly yanked to the ground, struggling to free themselves. The sticky substance seemed to be some sort of web-like material, and Pandora watched in confusion as the participant remained trapped, unable to move. As Pandora turned her attention forward again, she saw a large green vine burst out of the ground. Riding the vine, like a rider on a horse, was a woman with green hair and sharp green eyes. The vine carried her swiftly above the heads of the other participants as she leaped from plant to plant. Every time she landed, new vines erupted from the earth, providing her with an almost seamless path to move forward. While the plant woman continued her rapid ascent, Pandora noticed that many of the slower participants were getting bogged down. The ground had become muddy, and some runners were getting stuck, their movements sluggish as they tried to pull their feet free. Pandora, however, focused and propelled herself with her enhanced jumping ability, launching herself out of the sticky mess. Mid-jump, her thoughts wandered to how she would handle things if people started asking questions about her powers. She considered two options. She could either claim ignorance about her abilities, or pretend that she only had a single power. The latter might be more difficult, since she'd need to hide the second ability entirely if anyone pressed her. But as her mind churned with possibilities, she reassured herself, I don't need to worry too much. The Chaos Energy seems to have masked my other abilities. After all, she had sacrificed 13 abilities to merge them into one, leaving her with 47 distinct powers. A ridiculous amount, she thought, with odds of possessing such a number being nearly impossible. Pandora's train of thought was interrupted as her feet hit the mud once again. This time, she got momentarily stuck, but managed to wrench herself free and continue running. She was now among the lead group, quickly passing various obstacles that seemed to slow down the others. She jumped over hurdles and vaulted past barriers as the city walls loomed in the distance. The large gates were wide open, leading the racers out into the wilderness beyond. Just as Pandora thought she had settled into a steady rhythm, a loud croak caught her attention. Up ahead, sitting squarely in the middle of the path, was a monstrous frog, easily the size of a car. Disgust welled up in Pandora as the creature's slimy skin glistened under the sun. Without slowing her pace, Pandora raised her hand, summoning a turquoise glow. A ball of searing hot plasma formed in her palm, and with a flick, she launched it toward the frog. The plasma ball hit the creature dead on, and Pandora could hear the sickening sizzle as it began to burn. She wrinkled her nose in disgust, turning her head to avoid the smell. The frog wouldn't be a threat to the other competitors now, at least. As she vaulted over the charred remains of the frog, Pandora thought to herself, that thing was revolting, but how will the others react? Whatever. If anyone asks why I used such a dangerous ability, I'll just say I made sure no one was in the line of fire. Ahead, the track began to straighten out, but obstacles continued to rise from the ground. Pandora expertly dodged them, hearing the shouts and groans of other participants being caught in the traps or ensnared by nets. Suddenly, something hit Pandora, and before she could react, a foam-like substance wrapped around her, hardening almost instantly, trapping her in place. A young man came running to her aid. Placing his hand on the hardened foam, he sent crackling purple energy through it. The foam began to shudder and break apart, allowing Pandora to free herself. She leaped up and resumed running, but the lead she'd worked so hard to build was quickly diminishing. The young man matched her pace, running alongside her. "Hey, I just helped you out. Why are you running off like that?" he asked, sounding slightly irritated. Pandora shot him a cold glance and replied, "Because I need to win this race. I didn't ask for your help, so I don't owe you anything." "Yeah, but if we work together, we can reach the finish line faster." "Watch out," he yelled, just as a massive stone boulder rolled down the hill they were climbing. Pandora raised her hand, ready to blast the boulder to pieces, but before she could act, green vines erupted from the forest, halting the massive stone in its tracks. Pandora's eyes narrowed. Where are these vines coming from? She wondered. That plant woman's power is more than just controlling plants. She spotted the green-haired woman tossing a handful of seeds from her pockets, and the vines responded almost immediately, growing at an alarming rate. It was an impressive display, and Pandora felt a strange pull, a desire to take that power for herself. "Hey, what are you doing?" the young man asked as he watched Pandora leap over the immobilized boulder with ease. Pandora didn't respond, her focus solely on the race. He managed to catch up with her, huffing slightly. "Do you have more than one power?" he asked. His voice tinged with curiosity and suspicion. Pandora ignored him, pushing her legs to move faster. Pandora stood at the edge of the starting area, listening carefully as the holographic commentator reappeared in the air above them. The projection flickered slightly, her massive figure looming over the ruins. She announced that there were now 10 possible routes to the next checkpoint, each one around 10 kilometers long, and that every participant needed to choose one of the paths. The routes, however, wouldn't be easy. They were lined with obstacles, mechanical traps, and new dangers. The commentator's voice rang out clearly, cutting through the chatter of the competitors. As you progress through this next stage, you may use any means necessary to reach the goal first. Sabotage is permitted, as long as it doesn't cause serious injury. Remember, this is a race, not a fight to the death. Slowing others down, using your abilities strategically, and finding shortcuts are all part of the game. But be careful. Severe harm to other participants will lead to disqualification. Pandora's eyes narrowed as she processed the new rules. Sabotage. It was a risky proposition. She glanced around, noting the shifting expressions on the faces of the other competitors. Some of them were clearly eager for the opportunity to use their abilities against others, while others, like her, seemed more focused on finding the fastest route to the finish line. The countdown timer flickered above the gate, giving them all 30 seconds to prepare. The gate itself began to lower, revealing the dense forest beyond. However, a shimmering red holographic barrier still blocked the way, preventing anyone from rushing forward prematurely. Pandora watched it closely, noting the way it flickered as the countdown approached the final 10 seconds. The barrier began to blink rapidly, signaling that it was about to drop. Pandora's muscles tensed, ready to sprint the moment the barrier was gone. She wasn't the only one preparing. Mio was beside her, stretching his arms, clearly intending to use this opportunity to show off. His friends stood further back, whispering among themselves, but Mio's focus was solely on the race ahead. With a final flash, the barrier disappeared. Pandora launched herself forward, sprinting through the gate and into the forest. She could hear the others behind her, the thudding of footsteps, the rustling of leaves as the competitors all dashed into the different paths. Mio was keeping pace beside her, which annoyed her, but she had more pressing concerns. The obstacles were already beginning to appear. One competitor ahead of her shot 2 white threads from their wrists, attaching them to the trees. With a swift motion, they swung through the air like a superhero from the comic books Pandora had read in her downtime. For a moment, Pandora was impressed, but she quickly refocused as mechanical traps began to emerge from the underbrush. Turrets rose from the ground, firing nets toward the participants. Pandora could see them targeting the runners in front, testing their agility and reflexes. As more turrets activated, it became clear that dodging them all would slow her down too much. This was exactly the kind of obstacle that would waste precious time. Her hand glowed a vibrant turquoise as she prepared to fire a plasma orb at the closest turret, but Mio, ever the show-off, beat her to it. A concentrated fireball shot from his hand, hitting the turret dead on and detonating it in a small explosion. He turned to her with a smirk, as if expecting praise, but Pandora was already focused on the next threat. Her own plasma orb flew from her hand, obliterating a tree in its path. Mio wasn't done, though. She watched him launch several smaller, faster fire projectiles, each one hotter and more precise than the last. He was clearly enjoying himself, his confidence growing with each display of power. He even formed a fiery blade in his hand, slicing clean through a net that had been aimed at him. Pandora couldn't deny that his control over his flames was impressive. An idea sparked in her mind. If he could shape his fire into weapons, then surely she could manipulate her plasma in a similar way. Pandora glanced at her glowing hand and willed the plasma around it to extend, forming a protective shell just far enough from her skin that she wouldn't burn herself. With a quick, decisive punch, she tore through a projectile that had been flying toward her, the plasma acting as a searing extension of her fist. The sensation of controlling the plasma like that was exhilarating, and Pandora's mind raced with possibilities. The plasma hand she had just formed was larger than her own, and if she could push it further, she might be able to use it for more than just defense. She couldn't afford to waste the energy, though. Plasma took a significant amount of her reserves to create. With that in mind, she quickly shifted tactics, reforming the plasma into a blazing blue shield. She held it up just in time to block a net that had been fired from her right. The net disintegrated as it came into contact with the intense heat, its charred remains falling to the forest floor in blackened pieces. Pandora smiled to herself, pleased with how adaptable her powers could be. Beside her, Mio had noticed her quick thinking and nodded approvingly, though she could tell he wasn't about to admit he'd been impressed. He continued to burn through obstacles with his flames, while Pandora used her plasma in more controlled bursts, conserving her energy for when it would count. As they pressed on through the forest, the path grew more chaotic. The traps were becoming more complex, and the competitors were starting to take risks, using their abilities to sabotage each other as the commentator had encouraged. Pandora knew the real challenge was just beginning. Pandora was sprinting through the dense forest, her focus sharp and her thoughts racing with the possibilities of using her plasma powers in new ways. But suddenly, she froze. A deep, rumbling sound echoed in the air, different from the usual mechanical hum of the turrets or the rustling of the leaves. It was a strange, pulsating noise that sent a shiver down her spine. She looked up just in time to see a flicker of purple energy cut through the sky above her. It wasn't like anything she had seen before. The energy was chaotic, yet held an overwhelming presence, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to its will. Pandora felt her senses tingle. This was no ordinary power. She could feel it in her bones, a wave of immense paranormal force that screamed gravitational manipulation. Her eyes widened in shock as a figure soared, or rather, fell, through the air above her. At first, Pandora thought the person was flying, but no, she quickly realized that they were plummeting, just not downwards. The figure was falling in the direction of the goal, defying gravity in a way that made Pandora's stomach lurch. As the person descended, the surrounding turrets along that path were crushed, one by one, under the weight of the purple energy. The destruction was effortless, like crumpling paper under an invisible hand. Pandora's eyes tracked the figure as they zoomed past, close enough that she could make out details. It was a young woman with striking black hair and piercing purple eyes that glowed with the same chaotic energy that surrounded her. She was taller than Pandora, with a face that looked both distant and slightly irritated, as if lost in thought while being mildly annoyed by the world around her. Despite the brief moment, Pandora felt like that image was burned into her senses, as if this woman's presence was too powerful to forget. The turrets tried to fire at the young woman, but before they could release a single shot, shimmering purple rings appeared around them. As the rings descended, the turrets crumpled, flattened by what seemed like an immense gravitational force. Pandora could feel the weight of it in the air, heavy and oppressive. The woman didn't even glance at the turrets. They were nothing more than minor inconveniences crushed under her control. As Pandora stood there, stunned, she heard murmurs behind her. Competitors whispered frantically, and someone muttered, "That's Starbreaker's daughter." Pandora's heart skipped a beat at the name. Starbreaker was a legend, a hero of immense power, and his daughter, apparently born with an S-rank ability, was already feared by many. Pandora realized with a sinking feeling that this young woman was leagues above most of the other competitors. Some participants around her were starting to give up, acknowledging that they had no chance of winning against someone with such raw power. Pandora, however, clenched her fists. She wouldn't give up that easily. Yet, she couldn't deny the uneasy feeling that crept up her spine after witnessing that display of power. The young woman had already reached the goal ahead of them, effortlessly clearing the path, while others still struggled with obstacles. Pandora stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down into the rushing river far below. The current was fierce, crashing against the rocks with a thunderous roar. The gap was wide, wider than anything she could comfortably jump across with a single leap, even with her abilities. Her heart pounded as she assessed her options, but before she could decide on her next move, a sudden noise pulled her attention to the side. A boy with brown hair and sharp yellow eyes had stepped up beside her, his gaze focused intensely on the other side of the ravine. Without hesitation, he bent his knees and launched himself forward with a powerful leap. For a split second, it seemed like he might fall short, but then, with a blinding flash, an explosion erupted beneath his feet, propelling him higher into the air. He soared across the gap, the force of the blast sending him rocketing forward. Pandora watched in awe as the boy was catapulted through the air, crossing the entire ravine with the help of controlled explosions beneath his legs. He landed gracefully on the other side, the momentum of the explosion carrying him just far enough to plant his feet solidly on the ground. The boy glanced back briefly, a satisfied grin on his face, before he sprinted off into the distance. Pandora's focus shifted once more, and she spotted another group of participants nearby. A girl with bright green hair and glowing green eyes knelt down at the ravine's edge, her fingers digging into the soil. She was concentrating hard, her entire body tense with effort. Pandora realized what she was doing only when the earth around the girl began to shift. Long, thick vines sprouted from the ground, twisting and curling as they stretched out toward the other side of the ravine. The vines slithered forward like living things, forming a bridge. But it wasn't just the girl's power that made this possible. Beside her, a boy with blue eyes stood, his arm outstretched, using telekinesis to guide the vines across the gap. The two of them worked together in perfect synchronization, the boy's telekinetic ability ensuring the vines reached the opposite side and took root deep into the rock. The vines writhed and grew, digging into the earth and forming a stable, living bridge. Pandora watched as the roots spread and anchored themselves firmly in place. The bridge was solid, sturdy enough to hold multiple people. Without hesitation, several other contestants began to run across the vine bridge, their footsteps light and quick as they took advantage of the teamwork displayed by the green-haired girl and her telekinetic partner. For a moment, Pandora simply observed, her mind racing. Some participants were clearly working together, helping one another to overcome the obstacles. Others, like the boy with the explosions, seemed more focused on individual survival, relying solely on their own powers. Pandora wondered if this part of the competition was more than just a physical challenge. Could it be a test of character as well? A way to see who would collaborate and who would sabotage? The thought gnawed at her. It seemed too deliberate to be a coincidence. But there was no time to ponder the deeper meaning behind the challenge. She needed to act. Pandora crouched down, gathering every bit of energy she had left. She took a deep breath, then sprinted forward, pushing her legs as hard as she could. When she reached the very edge of the ravine, she leaped into the air, throwing herself over the gaping chasm. The wind whipped past her face as she sailed across the ravine, her body twisting in midair. Halfway through the jump, Pandora activated her second ability, a skill she had kept hidden from most of the other participants. She felt the familiar energy surge through her body, and suddenly, a platform materialized beneath her feet. It was barely visible, a thin, translucent surface that hovered in the air. Pandora pushed off from it, using the momentum to propel herself even further. In that moment, she realized she had revealed her secret. The double jump, an ability that marked her as someone with two distinct powers. Most contestants had only one, and now she had shown her hand. There was no time to dwell on it. The edge of the ravine was fast approaching, but her body was growing tired, and she could feel her D-rank ability nearing its limit. Just as she prepared to land, the platform beneath her feet flickered and crumbled, unable to hold her weight any longer. Pandora's heart lurched as she felt herself fall, but with a desperate reach, her fingers found the rocky edge of the ravine. She grabbed hold, her nails digging into the dirt as she dangled precariously over the abyss. For a few agonizing moments, she hung there, her arms burning from the strain. But she couldn't let go. Not now. Gritting her teeth, Pandora pulled herself up, inch by inch, until finally she rolled onto solid ground. She lay there for a second, gasping for breath, her body shaking from the exertion. As she pushed herself up onto her knees, she glanced across the ravine. Mio, the boy with two abilities like herself, was preparing to make his move. Pandora watched as he bent his legs, then launched himself into the air with a single powerful leap. He didn't need any platforms or assistance. His jump carried him effortlessly over the entire gap in one fluid motion. He landed smoothly on the other side, his expression calm and confident, as though the ravine had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Pandora shook her head and forced herself to stand. There was no time to feel envious of Mio's raw power. She had made it across the ravine, and that was all that mattered. Her muscles ached, her energy was nearly depleted, but she couldn't afford to slow down. With her heart still pounding, she broke into a run, following the path ahead. The race wasn't over, and she couldn't let herself fall behind. Pandora was running at full speed, her heart pounding in her chest, her legs burning from exhaustion, but her determination driving her forward. Just a few more meters, and the finish line would be within sight. The 10 kilometers had been grueling, full of obstacles, traps, and dangers that had tested every contestant's abilities and stamina. Suddenly, someone sprinted past her on the left, a blur of motion that caught her attention. It was a boy, his hair dark and wild, his eyes gleaming with intensity. As he ran, he fired off what looked like shards of ice. But these weren't ordinary ice shards. They were grayed with blackened edges, and as they streaked through the air, they shimmered with a strange heat. When they struck the ground, there was a sharp, sizzling sound, and the traps that had been waiting to catch those behind him were deactivated, melted or disarmed by the intense heat of the bizarre ice. Pandora was fascinated by the sight, her mind racing as she tried to process how something like ice could burn and melt at the same time. The sound of the sizzling black ice was almost hypnotic, a strange contrast to the chaotic environment around them. She pushed her body harder, matching his pace, even though she knew she was nearing her limit. Her D-rank ability had been stretched to the edge, but her willpower kept her going. The boy glanced at her, noticing her running beside him. His face was strained with effort, but he managed a grin. "You're not bad," he said between heavy breaths, his voice full of admiration. "Two abilities? That's pretty rare." His smile widened as he looked at her with a kind of respect. "I bet we could make good friends." Pandora wasn't sure how to respond. She was still trying to catch her breath when she heard a loud crack behind them. She turned her head just in time to see a massive tree trunk falling toward them, its thick bark groaning as it toppled over. She wasn't fast enough. There was no way she could dodge it in time. But just as she braced herself for the impact, the boy stomped on the ground, his foot hitting the earth with a solid thud. In an instant, a tall, gray wall of ice materialized between them and the falling tree. This time, the ice wasn't steaming or hissing. Instead, it was solid, cold to the touch, and strong enough to stop the tree in its tracks. The trunk crashed against the ice wall with a deafening thud, but the barrier held firm. The boy extended his hand to Pandora, pulling her up before the ice began to melt. The temperature of the wall was now merely lukewarm, a far cry from the burning heat of the shards he'd used earlier. "Come on," he urged, leading the way over the ice barrier. Other contestants were already scrambling over the frozen wall or climbing over the fallen tree trunk in desperation. In the background, someone screamed in pain. Pandora turned her head, but she couldn't make out who it was. It seemed that one of the contestants had triggered a trap. A dark pit had opened up beneath them, and the next thing Pandora knew, a bright blue light flashed down from the sky, illuminating the pit. The unfortunate contestant who had fallen into the trap was instantly disqualified, teleported away in a beam of disqualification light. Pandora didn't have time to dwell on it as more chaos erupted around her. Just ahead, she saw another contestant firing something at one of the others. It was a strange, viscous black substance that clung to its target's skin. The unlucky victim screamed in agony, desperately trying to scrape the burning, tar-like substance from their arm. The attacker, coated in the same slimy material, looked almost monstrous as the substance seemed to cover his body like armor. Before the fight could escalate, two beams of blue light shot down from the sky, and both the attacker and the victim disappeared, disqualified in an instant. Pandora assumed it was the work of an S-rank ability, possibly from one of the referees monitoring the event. There was no time to get distracted, though. She had to keep moving. Rounding a sharp corner, Pandora skidded to a stop. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the obstacle before her, a massive creature blocking the path. The contestants who had been ahead of her were already engaged in a desperate fight against the beast. It was unlike anything Pandora had ever seen. A B-rank monster towering over them with insect-like features, its armored body gleaming in the sunlight. This wasn't supposed to happen. B-rank monsters weren't allowed in the competition. They were far too powerful for the group of mostly D and E-ranked contestants to handle. Even with a few C-ranked participants, there was no way they could defeat it with their combined strength. Pandora stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The monster was too powerful, and she wasn't equipped to handle something like this. As she watched in horror, a figure appeared on top of the monster's head, a man in a purple hat with red and brown eyes. He wore a theatrical mask, one side smiling cheerfully, while the other had a single tear beneath its eye, giving him an eerie, unsettling presence. It took Pandora a moment to recognize him, but when she did, her blood ran cold. It was Phantom, the notorious criminal. He was known for his ability to control monsters and summon them at will, a power that made him one of the most dangerous B-rank villains, or possibly even stronger. What was he doing here? Phantom gave a theatrical bow, as if he were performing on stage, introducing himself to the crowd before carrying out his plan. Pandora's mind raced with panic. She knew they didn't stand a chance against him. If he was here, it meant trouble for all of them. With a dramatic flourish, Phantom reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. He tossed it into the air, and in an instant, there was a blinding flash of light. Pandora blinked, her vision momentarily impaired. When her sight cleared, another monster had appeared, a massive, buzzing creature resembling a giant wasp. Without hesitation, it began spraying green, toxic gas toward the contestants. Pandora's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. This was far worse than she had anticipated. Not only were they dealing with a B-rank monster, but now there were two, and one of them was releasing a poisonous cloud that could incapacitate or even kill them. She had to act fast. If there was any hope of surviving this, they would need to find a way to take down Phantom and his monsters, or at the very least, escape. Pandora's heart raced as she stared at the two massive monsters before her. The B-rank insect creature and the newly summoned wasp loomed over the battlefield, their sheer size and presence overwhelming. She could feel the power radiating from them, knowing they were far beyond anything she could handle with her current abilities. Her mind scrambled for a plan, but nothing seemed good enough. These monsters were too powerful, too unpredictable. Her D-rank abilities were already exhausted from the competition, and even her C-rank ability, Plasma, felt inadequate against these threats. Her fingers tingled as she contemplated using her plasma power. It was dangerous. She lacked control, and unleashing it here could just as easily backfire. The problem wasn't just power. What if these monsters weren't even weak to plasma? She could waste precious energy without making a dent. Still, Pandora knew she had to try something. Standing still wasn't an option. With a deep breath, Pandora gathered the crackling, glowing energy of plasma into her palms. The electric blue light intensified, swirling in her hands as she focused on the head of the insect monster where Phantom stood. Her eyes locked on her target as she pulled back and hurled the plasma ball with all her might. Phantom, still standing casually atop the creature, leaped off just as Pandora's attack launched toward him. His movement was graceful, like he had anticipated her every thought. But what happened next left Pandora speechless. In midair, Phantom extended his hand, not in defense or panic, but in a dismissive motion as though swatting away a fly. And that's exactly what it looked like. He casually wiped away the plasma ball as if it were nothing. It made no sense. Plasma, a superheated, deadly energy, couldn't just be brushed aside. Yet there it was, gone, without leaving even a trace of impact. Pandora's mind reeled. She darted her eyes around the battlefield, searching for any sign of her plasma's explosion. There was none. No scorch marks, no debris. It was as if her attack had simply disappeared into thin air. Her gaze snapped back to Phantom, who now stood calmly on the ground, completely unharmed. A terrifying realization dawned on her. Phantom hadn't just dodged her attack. He had negated it entirely. She had no idea how, but the implications were terrifying. 2 abilities. Pandora whispered to herself, her heart sinking. It couldn't be. 2 powers in one person were exceedingly rare, about 1 in 1,000. But for someone like Phantom, that terrifying criminal, to have 2 abilities, it made sense. And yet, an even scarier thought crept into her mind. What if he had more than 2? Could Phantom be one of those rare individuals with a 3rd power? The odds were astronomically low, but after what she'd just seen, nothing felt impossible anymore. Shaking her head, Pandora tried to clear her thoughts. Phantom was approaching her now, slowly, without a hint of worry. His movements were relaxed, confident, as if he wasn't concerned in the slightest about the ongoing battle, the chaos around them, or even the possibility of the Heroes Association finding him. He was untouchable, and he knew it. Every attack Pandora hurled at him was effortlessly nullified. Desperation clawed at her as one blast after another fizzled into nothingness. Each failure drained her both physically and mentally. She was running out of time, out of strength. As Phantom closed the distance between them, his eerie, masked face tilting slightly, he spoke. "What's a talented young woman like you doing here?" His voice was smooth, dripping with amusement. "I don't recall seeing you on the news, or in any of the lists of participants." Pandora's breath hitched. What did he want from her? The fact that he was talking instead of attacking made her even more uneasy. His words carried an unsettling curiosity, as if she were an anomaly he couldn't quite figure out, a predator toying with his prey. Phantom continued, his tone almost playful. "It's strange, don't you think? Someone with 2 abilities, hidden in plain sight. It's rare, suspiciously rare." Pandora's mind raced. She knew what he was implying. To him, someone with her powers should have been on the radar long ago, either as a hero or something else. He found it odd that she wasn't more well known, that someone with her potential had slipped under the radar. And now, she had drawn his unwanted attention. If she wanted to survive this, she needed to think fast. Phantom wasn't attacking her. Not yet. Maybe, just maybe, she could use that to her advantage. Pandora squared her shoulders, forcing herself to meet his gaze head on. "What do you mean by interested?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Statistically speaking, it's not impossible for someone with 2 abilities to fly under the radar. I haven't exactly been making headlines." Phantom's head tilted again, as if he were considering her response carefully. A moment of silence passed between them, the tension thickening. Pandora could sense it. He was intrigued by her, curious about who she was and why she hadn't been noticed before. But she also knew that the longer he stayed interested, the more dangerous this conversation would become. Whatever happened next, Pandora had to stay sharp. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to recommend my channel to your friends. This was a slightly longer video, but I hope you managed to stick through it, and that you enjoyed the story. I really hope to see you in the next video. Also, remember, you don't have to listen to all my stories in one go. Take your time. If you press on the left side of the screen, you'll be taken to my latest upload, and on the right, you'll find the playlist. And right in the middle at the top of your screen, you can click on my YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and see you soon.